The blood-soaked letter trembled in Penelope Zimmerman's hands as she read the final words from her father, written moments before the bandits had taken his life and burned their family ranch to ash. Montana Territory, 1878, had shown no mercy to the Zimmerman family, but Penelope had survived, and now she was heading south, as far from her painful memories as the stagecoach would take her. Last stop before Lordsburg, New Mexico. The driver called out as the coach rumbled to a halt at a dusty way station. Penelope gathered her modest belongings, a small trunk containing all that remained of her former life. 23 years old with nothing but a teaching certificate, $50 sewn into her hem, and a heart hardened by tragedy. The way station was little more than a rough-hewn building with a few tables where travelers could rest and take refreshment before continuing their journey. Penelope stepped down from the coach, her simple blue traveling dress already covered in a fine layer of dust. The southwestern sun beat down mercilessly, so different from the cooler Montana climate she had left behind. "Heading to Lordsburg, miss." A deep voice startled her. Penelope turned to face a tall man leaning against the way station's porch post. His face was partially shadowed by a worn leather hat, but she could see kind eyes studying her with interest. He wasn't dressed like the typical cowboys she had encountered. His clothes were of better quality, though still practical for the frontier. "Yes," she replied curtly, unwilling to engage in conversation with a stranger. The man straightened and tipped his hat. "Grant Kerrigan. I own the Double K Ranch outside Lordsburg." He gestured to the wagon nearby. "Heading back that way myself if you'd prefer a more comfortable ride than that stagecoach." Penelope stiffened. "Thank you, but I've already paid for my ticket. Suit yourself." He shrugged, seemingly unbothered by her rejection. "That coach is running 2 passengers over capacity. Next 16 miles are rough country. Offer stands if you change your mind." Penelope watched as he walked away, noting the easy confidence in his stride. She turned back to the stagecoach, where the driver was arguing with a family of 4 about their excessive luggage. 2 more passengers had joined, making the already crowded coach nearly impossible. With a sigh of resignation, Penelope collected her trunk and approached Grant Kerrigan's wagon. "Mr. Kerrigan," she called, "I may have reconsidered your offer." He turned, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth but not quite reaching his eyes. There was something guarded about him that she recognized, something familiar. "Changed your mind already?" he asked, loading her trunk into the wagon before offering his hand to help her up. Penelope ignored his hand and climbed up herself. "Practicality, not preference, Mr. Kerrigan. Fair enough." He climbed up beside her and took the reins. "What brings you to Lordsburg, miss?" "Zimmerman." "Penelope Zimmerman," she replied reluctantly. "I'm to be the new schoolteacher." Grant's eyebrows rose. "Well, we've been waiting for you then. Town's been without a proper teacher since Miss Holloway left to get married last spring." The wagon began moving, the gentle sway surprisingly more comfortable than the stagecoach had been. "You from back east?" he asked after a few moments of silence. "Montana Territory," she answered, keeping her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Long way from home." "I have no home," she said flatly, then immediately regretted revealing even that much. Grant gave her a sidelong glance but didn't press. Instead, he pointed ahead to a formation of red rocks. "That there's the entrance to Lordsburg Territory. Another hour and we'll be in town." Penelope nodded, grateful he hadn't asked more questions. As they traveled, he occasionally pointed out landmarks or shared bits of local knowledge, but otherwise respected her silence. The town of Lordsburg appeared on the horizon, a collection of buildings shimmering in the heat. It was larger than Penelope had expected, with a proper main street lined with businesses. She could see a church spire and what must be the schoolhouse at the edge of town. "School's there," Grant confirmed, following her gaze. "Town council fixed it up special for the new teacher. There's living quarters in the back." "Thank you for the information, Mr. Kerrigan," Penelope said formally. He chuckled. "Folks around here call me Grant. Mr. Kerrigan was my father." "Nevertheless, I prefer formality with people I've just met," she replied. They rolled into town, drawing curious glances from the townspeople. Penelope felt uncomfortable under their scrutiny, but kept her posture straight and her expression neutral. "There's Mayor Thornton," Grant said, nodding toward a portly man in a waistcoat who was hurrying toward them. "Looks like word of your arrival got here ahead of us. Miss Zimmerman," the mayor called, beaming as the wagon came to a stop. "Welcome to Lordsburg. We're so pleased you've arrived safely. I see you've already met one of our most prominent citizens." "Mayor," Grant greeted with a nod. "Mr. Kerrigan was kind enough to offer me transportation when the stagecoach became overcrowded," Penelope explained, allowing Grant to help her down from the wagon this time, if only for appearance's sake in front of the mayor. "Wonderful, wonderful," Mayor Thornton clasped his hands. "Let me show you to the schoolhouse right away. I'm sure you're tired from your journey." "I'll bring your trunk," Grant offered, lifting it easily from the wagon. The mayor led them down the main street, proudly pointing out the various businesses and introducing Penelope to everyone they passed. She nodded politely, though she doubted she would remember all the names. The schoolhouse stood at the end of a side street, a simple but well-maintained building with large windows. Adjacent to it was a small cottage that the mayor explained would be her living quarters. "It's modest but comfortable," Mayor Thornton said, opening the door. "The ladies' auxiliary stocked your pantry, and there's fresh linens on the bed." "Thank you," Penelope said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness. "That's very kind." Grant set her trunk down inside the door. "Need anything else, Miss Zimmerman?" "No, thank you, Mr. Kerrigan. I appreciate your assistance today." He tipped his hat. "My ranch is about 3 miles north of town if you need anything. Just ask anyone, they'll point you in the right direction." After the men left, Penelope closed the door and leaned against it, finally allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. The journey had been long, and memories of Montana still haunted her. She had come to Lordsburg to escape her past, to start fresh where no one knew about the tragedy that had claimed her family. But trust would not come easily, not after what had happened. The friendly faces of Lordsburg seemed welcoming enough, but Penelope had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. Even Grant Kerrigan, with his kind eyes and helpful manner, would remain at arm's length. She couldn't risk letting anyone get close again. The pain of loss was still too raw. With a deep breath, Penelope pushed away from the door and began to unpack her meager belongings. Tomorrow she would meet her students and a new chapter would begin. But this time, she would be more careful about whom she let into her life. The morning brought a chorus of birdsong and golden sunlight streaming through the cottage windows. Penelope had slept fitfully, dreams of flame and screaming still plaguing her, but she rose determined to present a composed front to her new students. The schoolhouse bell hung silent, waiting for her to give it voice. Penelope ran her fingers over the rope, a small smile touching her lips despite herself. Teaching had been her passion before tragedy struck, and perhaps it could be again. By 8 o'clock, children began to arrive, some on foot, others dropped off by parents in wagons. They stared at her with open curiosity as they filed into the schoolhouse. Penelope counted 23 students ranging from 6 to 16 years old. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady as she wrote her name on the blackboard. "I am Miss Zimmerman, and I will be your teacher." A small girl in the front row raised her hand immediately. Miss Zimmerman, did you really come all the way from Montana?" "I did," Penelope replied, surprised by the question. "News travels quickly in Lordsburg, it seems." "Mr. Kerrigan told my pa," the girl explained. "He said you was brave to travel so far alone." Penelope felt a flicker of annoyance that Grant Kerrigan was discussing her with the townspeople, but she kept her expression neutral. "Well, let's begin by introducing ourselves, shall we?" The morning passed quickly as Penelope assessed her students' various education levels. By noon, when she rang the bell for lunch, she had a clearer picture of what she was facing: a mixed group with wildly different abilities, but all eager to learn. As the children ate their packed lunches in the schoolyard, Penelope noticed a rider approaching. The sun glinted off familiar broad shoulders. "Grant Kerrigan." "Good day, Miss Zimmerman," he called, dismounting from a magnificent chestnut horse. "Thought I'd check in and see how your first day is progressing." "Mr. Kerrigan," she acknowledged with a nod. "The children are quite enthusiastic." He smiled, the expression warming his tanned face. "They've been excited about the new teacher for weeks. Been talking of nothing else." "I hear you've been discussing me with their parents," Penelope said, unable to keep a slight edge from her voice. Grant's smile faltered. "Only mentioned you'd arrived safely. Folks were concerned when you didn't come in on the expected coach." "I see." Penelope softened slightly, recognizing she might have jumped to conclusions. "Well, as you can see, I'm settling in fine. Glad to hear it." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Brought you something. Welcome gift of sorts." Penelope hesitated before accepting it. "That's not necessary, Mr. Kerrigan." "Maybe not, but neighborliness is important out here." He gestured to the package. "Go on." Unwrapping it carefully, Penelope found a leather-bound book, a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets. She looked up in surprise. "Town doesn't have much of a library," Grant explained, looking almost bashful. "Thought you might appreciate something to read besides school books." "I "Thank you," Penelope said, genuinely moved by the thoughtful gift. "This is very kind." Grant shrugged. "Just being neighborly, I should let you get back to your students." He tipped his hat and remounted his horse. "Good day, Miss Zimmerman." As he rode away, Penelope found herself watching him longer than was strictly proper. The book of sonnets clutched to her chest. The following weeks established a routine for Penelope. Mornings and afternoons were filled with teaching, evenings with grading papers and preparing lessons. Saturdays she spent exploring the town and getting to know the other residents. Sundays were for church and quiet reflection. Grant Kerrigan appeared periodically in town, always tipping his hat to her politely, but never imposing. Occasionally, he would stop by the schoolhouse with small gifts: a jar of honey from his bees, fresh apples from his orchard, once even a set of colored chalks for her blackboard that he said he'd ordered from Santa Fe. Despite her determination to keep people at a distance, Penelope found herself looking forward to these brief encounters. She learned from town gossip that Grant was 31, had inherited his ranch from his father 5 years ago, and was considered the most eligible bachelor in the county. What the gossips didn't know, and what Penelope detected in their interactions, was that Grant carried his own burdens. There was a guardedness behind his friendly demeanor that mirrored her own. One Saturday in late September, Penelope was shopping for supplies when a commotion erupted outside the general store. A group of cowboys had ridden in, clearly intoxicated despite the early hour. "Where's that pretty new schoolmarm?" one of them called, his words slurred. "Heard she's a real looker." Penelope froze inside the store, her heart pounding. Mrs. Henderson, the storekeeper's wife, stepped protectively closer. "Stay inside, dear," she whispered. "Sheriff Dawson will handle them." Through the window, Penelope watched as a tall figure dismounted from a horse further down the street. Grant. He approached the drunken cowboys calmly. "That's enough, boys," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "Time for you to head back to wherever you came from." "Mind your own business, Kerrigan," the loudest cowboy sneered. "We're just being friendly." "Miss Zimmerman is under my protection," Grant said evenly. "And you're disturbing the peace in Lordsburg." The cowboy laughed. "Under your protection, that what they're calling it now." Grant's posture shifted subtly, and even from a distance, Penelope could sense the danger radiating from him. Last chance to ride out peaceful-like. Sheriff Dawson arrived then, rifle in hand. "You heard Mr. Kerrigan. Move along." Outnumbered and outgunned, the cowboys reluctantly mounted up and rode away, shouting obscenities as they left. When Penelope finally emerged from the store, Grant was waiting. "Are you all right, Miss Zimmerman?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. "I'm fine," she replied, though her hands still trembled slightly. "Thank you for your intervention." "Those were Johnson's men from the bar, Jay. They're usually not so bold, but they've been drinking." Grant frowned. "Would you allow me to escort you home?" Penelope hesitated, then nodded. As they walked toward her cottage, she found herself asking, "What did you mean when you said I was under your protection?" Grant looked uncomfortable. "Just something to make them back down. I apologize if it sounded presumptuous." "It was effective," she conceded. "Though I've been taking care of myself for some time now." "I don't doubt that," Grant said, glancing at her profile. "But even the strongest among us can use a friend sometimes." When they reached her door, Penelope turned to face him. "Mr. Kerrigan, why have you been so kind to me?" Grant's expression softened. "Because when you first arrived, I recognized something in you that I understand all too well." "And what might that be?" she asked quietly. "Loss," he said simply. "And the walls built around a heart to protect it from happening again." Penelope felt exposed, as if he had seen right through the careful barriers she had constructed. "You know nothing about me." "I know enough," Grant replied. "I know you're brave and dedicated to those children. I know you're determined to stand on your own. And I know that whatever drove you from Montana still haunts you." "I should go inside," Penelope said, suddenly needing distance from his perceptiveness. Grant nodded, stepping back. "Of course. Good day, Miss Zimmerman." That night, Penelope sat by her window, the book of sonnets open on her lap, though she wasn't reading. Grant's words echoed in her mind. How had he seen through her so easily? And why did the idea of someone understanding her pain both terrify and comfort her? October brought cooler weather and preparation for the Harvest Festival. The entire town was involved, and Penelope found herself on the planning committee alongside the mayor's wife and several other prominent ladies. "We need someone to organize the children's games," Mrs. Thornton was saying during a meeting at the church. "Miss Zimmerman, perhaps you could take charge of that." "Of course," Penelope agreed, making notes in her small notebook. "Excellent. And Mr. Kerrigan has offered his apple orchard for the pie-making contest ingredients. Perhaps you could coordinate with him on that as well." Penelope looked up sharply. "I'm sure Mr. Kerrigan is quite busy with his ranch. Maybe someone else—" "Nonsense," Mrs. Thornton interrupted with a knowing smile. "He specifically mentioned working with you when he made the offer." The other ladies exchanged meaningful glances, making Penelope uncomfortable. Clearly, the town had noticed Grant's attentions, despite how careful she had been to maintain a proper distance. Later that afternoon, as Penelope was walking home from school, a wagon pulled up beside her. "Miss Zimmerman," Grant called, reining his horses to a stop. "Mrs. Thornton tells me we're to work together on the festival preparations." Penelope sighed. "So it seems, though I'm not sure what coordination is required for you to donate apples." Grant chuckled. "More than you might think." Would you join me for a drive out to the orchard tomorrow after school? You can see what varieties we have and decide which would be best for the different contests." A part of Penelope wanted to decline, to maintain the safe distance she had established. But another part, a part she had thought long buried, was curious about Grant Kerrigan and his ranch, about the life he had built here. "Very well," she agreed. "For the sake of the festival." "For the festival," Grant echoed, though his smile suggested he saw through her rationalization. The following afternoon, Grant arrived promptly as school dismissed. Penelope had worn her best day dress, a deep green that complemented her auburn hair, telling herself it was merely to make a good impression as a representative of the town. The Double K Ranch was more impressive than Penelope had imagined, a sprawling property with a large main house, several outbuildings, and acres of well-tended land. The apple orchard covered a hillside, the trees heavy with fruit ready for harvest. "It's beautiful," Penelope admitted as Grant helped her down from the wagon. "Thank you. Been in the Kerrigan family for 3 generations now." Pride was evident in his voice. "My grandfather started with nothing but a claim and a dream. Built it into one of the most prosperous spreads in the territory." They walked among the trees, the afternoon sun filtering through the branches. Grant pointed out the different apple varieties, occasionally reaching up to pluck a particularly fine specimen for her to taste. "This one's best for baking," he explained, handing her a tart green apple. "And those red ones there make the sweetest cider you've ever tasted." Penelope bit into the apple, surprised by its crisp flavor. "It's delicious." Grant smiled, clearly pleased by her approval. "Housekeeper's waiting with coffee and some fresh apple cake, if you're interested." The main house was warm and welcoming, decorated with solid, comfortable furniture and family heirlooms. Mrs. Benson, the housekeeper, was a cheerful woman in her 50s who greeted Penelope like a long-awaited guest. "So this is the teacher Mr. Kerrigan's been talking about," she said warmly. Come in, come in. Coffee's hot and the cake just came out of the oven." Grant cleared his throat, looking slightly embarrassed. "Thank you, Mrs. Benson. We'll have it in the parlor." The parlor featured large windows overlooking the ranch lands. As they sat enjoying Mrs. Benson's excellent cake, Penelope found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in months. "You have a lovely home," she said. "It must be wonderful to have such deep roots in one place." Something flickered in Grant's eyes, a sadness that caught her attention. "It is, though it can be solitary at times. Ranch this size was meant for a family." "You have no family?" Penelope asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Forgive me, that's none of my business." "No need for forgiveness," Grant said, setting down his coffee cup. "My parents are both gone now. Father passed 5 years ago, mother the year before. I was their only child." "I'm sorry," Penelope said quietly. Grant studied her for a moment. "And your family, Miss Zimmerman? Are they still in Montana?" Penelope tensed, the familiar pain surfacing. "No, they're gone." "I suspected as much," Grant said gently. "I won't pry, but if you ever want to talk about it, I'm a good listener." The sincerity in his voice nearly broke through Penelope's carefully constructed walls. For a brief moment, she considered telling him everything about the ranch raid, her father's murder, her narrow escape, the guilt she carried for surviving when the rest of her family hadn't. But the pain was still too raw, the trust too difficult to give. "Thank you, but I should be getting back to town," she said instead, rising from her chair. "It's getting late." If Grant was disappointed by her withdrawal, he didn't show it. "Of course. I'll have the apples delivered to town next week for the festival." On the ride back to Lordsburg, they spoke of safer topics: the festival plans, the progress of her students, the changing seasons. But something had shifted between them, a quiet acknowledgement of shared pain that created a tentative bond. As Grant helped her down from the wagon in front of her cottage, he held her hand a moment longer than necessary. "Miss Zimmerman Penelope," he said, the first time he had used her given name. "Whatever drove you from Montana, know that Lordsburg is a good community. People here look out for each other." "Thank you for the tour of your orchard, Mr. Kerrigan," she replied formally, withdrawing her hand. "It was most educational." His lips quirked in a half-smile. "Back to Mr. Kerrigan, is it, after I dared use your Christian name?" "Propriety is important for a teacher," Penelope said, though even to her own ears the excuse sounded weak. "Propriety," Grant echoed, shaking his head slightly. "Well then, good evening, Miss Zimmerman. I'll see you at the festival." As she watched him drive away, Penelope felt a conflicting mixture of relief and regret. Grant Kerrigan was becoming dangerously close to breaching the walls she had built around her heart, and she wasn't sure whether to strengthen those defenses or let them fall. The Harvest Festival transformed Lordsburg from a dusty frontier town into a vibrant celebration of community. Stalls lined the main street, offering everything from handcrafted goods to home-baked treats. Children ran laughing between games, and a makeshift dance floor had been constructed in front of the saloon, which had been temporarily converted into a family-friendly establishment for the occasion. Penelope supervised the children's games in the morning, her heart lighter than it had been in months as she watched her students enjoying themselves. Parents thanked her repeatedly for her work with their children, and for the first time, she felt truly accepted as part of the community. By mid-afternoon, the pie contest was underway. Grant's apples featured prominently in most entries, and he stood nearby as the judges, including Penelope, tasted each offering. "Mrs. Henderson's apple crumble is divine," Penelope commented as they moved between entries. "Wait until you try Mrs. Benson's Dutch apple," Grant replied, leaning closer to whisper. "Though don't tell her I gave you advance warning. She'll win, she always does." Penelope laughed, the sound surprising her. How long had it been since she had laughed so freely? As evening approached, the band began to play and couples moved onto the dance floor. Penelope watched from the sidelines, content to observe the community's joy. "May I have this dance, Miss Zimmerman?" Grant appeared beside her, looking handsome in his best shirt and waistcoat. Penelope hesitated. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate, Mr. Kerrigan." As the teacher, "Look around," Grant interrupted gently. "The mayor's dancing with his wife, the banker with his. Even Sheriff Dawson is taking a turn with the widow Carson. One dance between neighbors isn't going to scandalize anyone." Before she could protest further, he took her hand and led her to the dance floor. The band was playing a waltz, and Grant's hand settled respectfully at her waist as they began to move to the music. "You're a fine dancer, Mr. Kerrigan," Penelope said, surprised by his grace. "My mother insisted I learn properly," he replied with a smile. "Said no son of hers would clod around a dance floor like a bear with sore paws." Penelope laughed again, earning a look of delighted surprise from Grant. "You should laugh more often," he said, his voice low. "It suits you." The intimacy of the moment struck Penelope suddenly how close they were standing, his hand warm against hers, the way his eyes seemed to see past her defenses. Panic fluttered in her chest. "I think I need some air," she said abruptly, pulling away. "Excuse me." She hurried away from the dance floor, past the stalls and revelers, not stopping until she reached the quiet darkness behind the schoolhouse. Leaning against the wall, Penelope took deep breaths, trying to steady her racing heart. "Penelope," Grant's voice came from the shadows. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Please just go back to the festival." Instead of leaving, he moved closer, his expression concerned in the faint moonlight. Did I do something wrong? Say something to upset you? No, it's not. Penelope struggled to find the words. I can't do this, Mr. Kerrigan. Do what exactly? He asked quietly. This. She gestured between them. Whatever is happening between us, I didn't come to Lordsburg looking for attachments. Grant studied her for a long moment. What did you come looking for? Peace, she admitted. A quiet life, safety. From what? When she didn't answer, he sighed. Penelope, I understand wanting to protect yourself. God knows I've done the same. But at some point, you have to decide if the walls you've built are keeping pain out or just keeping you in. His words struck her with unexpected force. You don't understand. Then help me understand, Grant said, his voice gentle but insistent. What happened in Montana? What are you running from? The memories surged forward, memories she had tried so hard to suppress. My family was killed, she said, the words tearing from her throat. Our ranch was raided by a gang looking for money Father had been saving. They shot him when he tried to protect us. Set fire to the house with my mother and younger sister inside. Grant's face paled in the moonlight. Penelope, I'm so sorry. I was in town, she continued, the floodgates now open. Teaching at the local school. When I came home, everything was gone. Everyone was gone. The only reason I'm alive is because I wasn't there. I couldn't save them. Tears streamed down her face now, unchecked. Grant moved forward hesitantly, and when she didn't back away, he gently pulled her into his arms. It wasn't your fault, he murmured against her hair. There was nothing you could have done. I should have been there, she sobbed into his chest. They needed me, and I wasn't there. And then you would be gone too, Grant said firmly. Your survival doesn't dishonor their memory, Penelope. Living a good life honors them. For long minutes he simply held her while she cried, his hand making soothing circles on her back. When her tears finally subsided, Penelope pulled back slightly, embarrassed by her breakdown. I'm sorry, she said, wiping her eyes. I don't usually. Don't apologize, Grant said. Not for feeling, not for grieving. In the distance, the music from the festival continued, a cheerful counterpoint to the heaviness between them. We should go back, Penelope said finally. People will wonder where we've gone. Grant nodded, but before stepping away, he took her hand in his. Penelope, I won't push you. I understand what it's like to carry grief, but I hope someday you'll trust me enough to let me be more than just your neighbor. Penelope looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. I don't trust easily, she warned, her voice barely above a whisper. Grant's smile was gentle. I'll wait as long as it takes. The words hung between them, a promise and a challenge. Penelope didn't pull her hand away immediately, allowing herself to feel the warmth of his touch before finally stepping back. We should return separately, she suggested, for propriety's sake. Grant nodded, though his eyes held a hint of amusement at her concern for appearances even now. I'll wait 5 minutes before following. As Penelope walked back toward the lights and music of the festival, she felt lighter somehow, as if sharing her burden had diminished its weight. It frightened her, this feeling of connection to Grant, but for the first time since leaving Montana, she allowed herself to consider the possibility of letting someone into her life again. The weeks following the Harvest Festival brought change to Lordsburg. The weather turned cooler, and preparations for winter began in earnest. Penelope's school thrived, with her students making remarkable progress under her guidance. Grant came to town more frequently, often finding reasons to visit the schoolhouse after classes had dismissed. Sometimes he brought small books for her classroom library, a warm woolen shawl when the first cold snap hit, once even a kitten he'd rescued from his barn that he claimed would be good for catching mice in the schoolhouse. Does the schoolhouse have a mouse problem, Mr. Kerrigan? Penelope had asked, holding the tiny gray kitten. "Every building in the territory has mice, Miss Zimmerman," he'd replied with a twinkle in his eye. "This little fellow needs a home, and I thought you might appreciate the company." She named the kitten Shakespeare, and he quickly became a beloved fixture in the classroom, much to the children's delight. As November progressed, Penelope found herself gradually lowering her defenses around Grant. Their conversations became more personal, more meaningful. He told her about his time at university back east, his return when his father fell ill, his struggles to modernize the ranch while honoring his family's traditions. In turn, Penelope shared more about her life in Montana, happy memories of her family, her father's dreams for their ranch, her mother's love of music, her sister's artistic talent. Speaking of them still brought pain, but increasingly it brought comfort as well. One crisp Saturday afternoon, Grant invited her to ride out to a mesa north of town. "The view is spectacular," he promised. "You can see for miles in every direction." Penelope hesitated, aware that such an excursion alone with Grant would certainly raise eyebrows in town. "I'm not sure, Mrs. Benson will accompany us," he added quickly, understanding her concern. "She's been after me to take her gathering juniper berries anyway. She makes a tonic from them for winter coughs." With Mrs. Benson's presence providing propriety, Penelope agreed. The ride was longer than she expected, but the company made it pleasant. Mrs. Benson regaled them with stories of Lordsburg's early days, of Grant as a boy, always in some mischief or another, but with a heart of gold, and of the various remedies she'd learned from her grandmother. When they reached the mesa, Penelope gasped at the view. The landscape stretched before them, painted in shades of red, gold, and brown. The distant mountains shimmered in the afternoon light, and the vast sky seemed close enough to touch. "It's magnificent," she breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "Worth the ride?" Grant asked, watching her reaction with pleasure. "Absolutely." Mrs. Benson busied herself collecting berries some distance away, humming as she worked. Grant spread a blanket on a flat rock and produced a small picnic from his saddlebags: bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a jug of sweet cider. As they ate, Penelope found herself studying Grant's profile against the dramatic backdrop. He was a handsome man, certainly, but it was more than that. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength that drew her. "Something on your mind?" he asked, catching her gaze. Penelope blushed, embarrassed at being caught staring. "I was just thinking how different your life might have been if you'd stayed back east after university." "Different, yes, but not better," Grant replied thoughtfully. "I belong here. Took me a while to realize it, but this land is part of me." "I felt that way about Montana," Penelope admitted. "Our ranch was everything to me when I lost it. I felt untethered, as if I'd lost my place in the world." Grant was quiet for a moment, then asked carefully, "Do you think you could ever feel that connection to a new place? To Lordsburg, perhaps?" The question carried more weight than its simple words suggested. Penelope looked out across the vast landscape, considering. "I'm starting to," she said finally. "The school, the children, the community, they matter to me now." Grant's hand moved to cover hers on the blanket. "And what about me, Penelope? Do I matter to you?" Her heart quickened at his touch, at the directness of his question. "You know you do," she said softly. "I'd like to court you properly," Grant said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "With your permission." The word court hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Penelope looked down at their joined hands, fear and hope warring within her. "I'm still healing," she said hesitantly. "There are days when the grief is overwhelming, when I'm not sure I have anything to give." "I'm not asking for everything at once," Grant replied. "Just a chance to show you that life can be good again, that love doesn't have to be frightening. Love. The word made Penelope tremble slightly. Was that what was growing between them? Could she open herself to that possibility after everything she'd lost? "I still don't trust easily," she warned again, echoing her words from the harvest festival. Grant's fingers tightened gently around hers. "And I meant what I said then. I'll wait as long as it takes." Penelope met his gaze, seeing the sincerity there, the patience and understanding. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her hand to interlace her fingers with his. "You don't have to wait any longer," she said quietly. "Yes, you may court me, Grant Kerrigan." His smile was like sunrise breaking across the horizon. Before he could respond, Mrs. Benson called from nearby, "Found enough berries to last the winter. Are you young folks ready to head back?" Grant laughed, squeezing Penelope's hand once more before releasing it. "Perfect timing as always, Mrs. Benson," he called back. The ride back to town was filled with a new awareness between them. Though they maintained a proper distance with Mrs. Benson present, something fundamental had changed. Penelope could feel it in the way Grant looked at her, in the way her own heart lightened at his smile. Word of their courtship spread quickly through Lordsburg. Penelope found herself the subject of good-natured teasing from her students and knowing smiles from the townswomen. Most were supportive, seeing the match as ideal, the respected rancher and the beloved teacher. "About time Grant Kerrigan found himself a good woman," Mrs. Henderson remarked one day as Penelope shopped for supplies. "That man's been alone too long. Ranch like his needs a mistress." Such comments made Penelope uncomfortable, the implication that marriage was already a foregone conclusion. Grant, however, seemed content to proceed slowly, respecting her need for caution. Their courtship developed through small moments: Sunday drives after church, shared meals with friends as chaperones, walks through town in the evening. Grant never pushed for more intimacy than she was ready to give, though his eyes often held a warmth that made her blush. As December approached, excitement grew for the Christmas celebrations. The school was preparing a pageant, and Penelope found herself busier than ever with rehearsals and preparations. "You look exhausted," Grant commented one afternoon, meeting her as school dismissed. "Let me walk you home." "The pageant is consuming every spare moment," she admitted as they walked. 23 children to costume, lines to memorize, songs to practice. "You're working too hard," Grant said, concern evident in his voice. "The children would understand if you simplified things." Penelope shook her head stubbornly. "Many of these children have never been in a proper Christmas pageant. I want it to be special for them." Grant chuckled, shaking his head. "Your dedication is admirable if exhausting to witness. At least let me help. I'm handy with a hammer. I could build your stable backdrop." "That would be wonderful," Penelope said gratefully. "The one we have is falling apart." As they reached her cottage, Grant stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Penelope, there's something I wanted to ask you." The seriousness in his tone made her heart skip. "Yes, Christmas dinner." "At the ranch. Mrs. Benson is planning quite a feast, and I'd like you to join us, as my guest." The invitation was significant, a formal acknowledgement of their relationship, a step toward integrating her into his life more fully. "I'd be honored," she said softly. Grant's face brightened. "Wonderful, and perhaps afterward we might have some time alone. There's something important I want to discuss with you." Penelope's breath caught. Though he hadn't said it directly, the implication was clear. After nearly 3 months of cautious courtship, Grant was ready to take the next step, perhaps even propose. "That sounds lovely," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Grant's smile was tender as he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Until tomorrow, then." As he walked away, Penelope stood watching him, a mixture of joy and trepidation swirling within her. Did she love Grant Kerrigan? The question had been circling in her mind for weeks now. When she imagined her future in Lordsburg, he was inevitably part of that vision. His kindness, his patience, his understanding had slowly but surely worked their way past her defenses. But marriage was something else entirely, a commitment she hadn't allowed herself to consider since the tragedy. Could she truly open herself to that vulnerability again? To love someone so completely, knowing that loss was always possible. The week before Christmas brought the season's first heavy snowfall. The schoolhouse was warm and cozy, however, as the children performed their pageant to a packed house of proud parents and community members. Grant sat in the front row, his eyes rarely leaving Penelope as she directed the proceedings. Afterward, as parents collected their excited children and the townspeople mingled, enjoying hot cider and Christmas cookies, Grant made his way to Penelope's side. "That was wonderful," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "You've done something special here." "The children did all the work," Penelope demurred, though she couldn't hide her pride in their performance. "They had an excellent teacher," Grant insisted. He glanced around at the crowded room, then leaned closer to whisper, "Come outside with me for a moment. I have something for you." Curious, Penelope followed him to the schoolhouse porch. The night was clear now, stars brilliant overhead despite the cold. "It's beautiful," she said, her breath forming clouds in the frosty air. "Yes, it is," Grant agreed, though he was looking at her rather than the sky. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in silver paper. "Merry Christmas, Penelope." "But Christmas is still days away," she protested, though she accepted the gift. "Consider it an early present," Grant smiled. "Go on, open it." Carefully unwrapping the paper, Penelope revealed a small velvet box. Her heart began to pound as she opened it, revealing a delicate silver locket. "Grant, it's beautiful," she breathed, lifting it from the box. "Open it," he urged gently. Inside, she found a tiny photograph of her family, her parents and sisters, smiling at the camera. Tears sprang to her eyes. "How did you?" "I wrote to the sheriff in your hometown," Grant explained. Asked if any photographs had survived the fire. He found this one in the town photographer's records, had a copy made and sent it here. Penelope was speechless, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. That he had gone to such lengths, understood so completely what would mean the most to her. "I thought you might want to keep them close to your heart," Grant said softly, "to carry them with you always." "Thank you," she whispered, tears flowing freely now. "This means more than I can say." Grant took the locket from her trembling hands and gently fastened it around her neck. "They'll always be part of you, Penelope. Part of who you are. I would never want to change that." In that moment, looking up at this man who had so carefully, so patiently worked his way into her heart, Penelope knew with sudden clarity that she loved him. The realization wasn't a revelation or a surprise, it was simply a truth that had been growing within her all these months. "Grant," she began, her voice thick with emotion. The schoolhouse door burst open and Mayor Thornton emerged looking agitated. "Kerrigan, there you are. Bad news, I'm afraid. Fire at the Johnson Ranch. They're calling for all able men to help." Grant's expression shifted immediately to concern. "How bad?" "Barns gone, trying to save the house and the livestock. Sheriff's organizing a rescue party now." "I'll get my horse," Grant said, then turned back to Penelope. "I'm sorry, go," she urged. "They need you." He hesitated just a moment, then leaned down to press a quick, fierce kiss to her lips, their first kiss, stolen in a moment of crisis. "Wait for me," he whispered, then hurried away. Penelope stood on the porch, fingers touching her lips, watching as Grant and other men from town mounted up and rode off into the snowy night. The locket hung warm against her skin, a tangible reminder of what she had lost, and what she had found again. The Johnson Ranch fire raged through the night. Penelope waited at the schoolhouse with other women, preparing food and bandages for the men when they returned. When dawn broke, the first riders came back, exhausted and smoke-stained. "The house is saved," Sheriff Dawson reported. "Lost the barn and some livestock, but could have been much worse." "Any injuries?" Mrs. Thornton asked anxiously. "Burns and smoke, nothing too serious. Doc's tending to them now." Penelope scanned the returning men, not seeing Grant among them. "Is everyone accounted for?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The sheriff nodded. "Kerrigan and a couple others stayed behind to make sure the embers don't flare up again. They'll be back by noon." Relief flooded through her. As the morning progressed, Penelope returned to her cottage, changed her clothes, and tried to rest, though sleep eluded her. Her mind kept returning to that moment on the porch, Grant's kiss, the feeling of his lips on hers, the certainty that had filled her heart. By mid-afternoon, when Grant still hadn't returned to town, worry began to gnaw at her again. She was just putting on her coat, determined to find someone who might have news, when a knock came at her door. Opening it revealed Mrs. Benson, her face grave. "Miss Zimmerman," she said. "You need to come to the ranch right away." Penelope's heart froze. "What's happened? Is Grant?" "He's alive," Mrs. Benson said quickly. "But hurt. The doctor's with him now." The ride to the Double K seemed interminable. Mrs. Benson explained that Grant had been helping move horses from a burning-out building when a beam had collapsed. Hit his back and legs. They brought him home an hour ago. At the ranch, Penelope barely waited for the wagon to stop before jumping down and rushing inside. Dr. Wilson was just emerging from a bedroom off the main hall. "How is he?" Penelope demanded, not caring how forward she might appear. The doctor sighed. "Burned along his right side and a nasty blow to his back. He's in considerable pain, but he should recover with time and rest." "Can I see him?" she asked. Dr. Wilson studied her for a moment, then nodded. "He's been asking for you. Just keep it brief. He needs rest." The bedroom was dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon light. Grant lay in the large bed, his torso bandaged, his face pale against the pillows. "Penelope," he said when he saw her, his voice weak but relieved. "You came." "Of course I came." She moved to his bedside, taking his hand carefully, mindful of the bandages. "How are you feeling?" "Like I wrestled a burning building and lost." He attempted a smile, though it quickly turned to a grimace of pain. "Don't try to be brave," she scolded gently. "The doctor says you need rest." Grant's eyes held hers, suddenly serious. "I'm sorry about Christmas dinner. I'm afraid I've ruined our plans." "Don't be ridiculous," Penelope said. "There will be other Christmases." Something in her words made his expression brighten despite his pain. "You mean that? You see more Christmases in our future?" Penelope felt tears welling in her eyes. "I do. Many more if you'll have me." "If I'll have you," Grant repeated incredulously. "Penelope, I was going to ask you to marry me on Christmas Day." The admission hung between them, finally spoken aloud. Penelope's heart swelled with emotion. "I know," she said softly, "and I was going to say yes." Grant's grip tightened on her hand. "Were you, even with all your reservations, your fears?" "I still have fears," Penelope admitted. "I probably always will, but I've learned something important these past months." She touched the locket at her throat. "Loving someone means risking loss. There's no way around that, but never loving again, that's the greater loss." Grant's eyes shone with unshed tears. "Penelope Zimmerman, will you marry me? Not tomorrow or even next month if you need more time, but someday when you're ready." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you, Grant Kerrigan, and I don't need more time. I've had enough of waiting for life to begin again." The joy that transformed his face was worth every moment of pain, every tear she had shed on her journey to this moment. With gentle care, Penelope leaned down and pressed her lips to his, sealing their promise with a kiss. Christmas came to the Double K with subdued celebration. Grant was still confined to bed, though improving daily under Dr. Wilson's care and Mrs. Benson's watchful eye. Penelope spent most of her school holiday at the ranch, reading to Grant, playing chess with him, and helping Mrs. Benson prepare simple Christmas treats. News of their engagement spread quickly through Lordsburg, bringing a stream of well-wishers bearing gifts and food. The mayor and his wife, the sheriff and his family, parents of Penelope's students all came to offer congratulations and support. "So much for a quiet engagement," Grant commented one afternoon as the last visitors departed. He was sitting up in bed now, able to move with care, though still in pain. "Small towns," Penelope smiled, settling into the chair beside his bed. "No secrets." "Are you sorry about that?" Grant asked, studying her expression. "Having our news shared so widely before we could announce it ourselves," Penelope considered the question. A few months ago, such public attention would have made her deeply uncomfortable. Now she found she didn't mind. "No," she said honestly. "It's nice, actually, feeling part of a community that cares." Grant reached for her hand. "Have you thought about when you might like to have the wedding?" "Spring, perhaps, when the apple blossoms are out." The idea of a spring wedding with the orchard in bloom was appealing. "That sounds lovely. By then you should be fully recovered." "Dr. Wilson says I'll be up and about in a few weeks," Grant said, "though no riding or heavy work until spring." "Good," Penelope said firmly. "I won't have you risking your recovery with impatience." Grant chuckled. "Yes, madam." As January progressed, school resumed, and Penelope found herself dividing her time between teaching and helping at the ranch. Grant continued to heal, gradually regaining his strength and mobility. By February, he was able to move around the house with the aid of a cane, though he tired easily. Valentine's Day brought an unexpected snowstorm that forced Penelope to dismiss school early. Rather than return to her cottage in town, she decided to ride out to the Double K, arriving just as the snow began to fall in earnest. "This is a pleasant surprise," Grant said, greeting her in the parlor where he had been reading by the fire. "Though I worry about you traveling in this weather." "The storm came on faster than anyone expected," Penelope explained, warming her hands by the fire. "I thought it better to come here than stay alone in town." Mrs. Benson appeared in the doorway. "Looks like we're in for a proper blizzard, Mr. Kerrigan." "Miss Zimmerman will need to stay the night. I've made up the guest room." The propriety of the arrangement was preserved by Mrs. Benson's presence, though Penelope felt a flutter of nerves at the thought of spending the night under Grant's roof, the first time she had done so. After dinner, the three of them sat in the parlor while the wind howled outside. Mrs. Benson knitted by the fire while Grant and Penelope played chess, their game punctuated by comfortable conversation. "I've been thinking," Grant said as he moved his bishop, "about the cottage behind the schoolhouse." "What about it?" Penelope asked, studying the board. "After we're married, I assume you'll move here to the ranch. The town will need to find a new teacher who can use the cottage." Penelope looked up, suddenly realizing the implications of their marriage she hadn't fully considered. "I hadn't thought about leaving the school," she admitted, Grant's brow furrowed. "Would you want to continue teaching? The ride to town every day would be considerable." "I love teaching," Penelope said slowly. "The children mean a great deal to me." "Then we'll find a solution," Grant said without hesitation. "Perhaps a larger house in town for the new teacher, so you can keep the cottage as a place to stay during the week." The easy way he accommodated her wishes without question or complaint filled Penelope with warmth. "You wouldn't mind having a wife who teaches?" "Mind? Why would I mind having a wife who is educated and dedicated to helping children? Grant shook his head. I'm proud of what you do, Penelope. I wouldn't ask you to give up something that brings you such joy. From her corner, Mrs. Benson made a sound of approval. Well said, Mr. Kerrigan. A good husband supports his wife's calling. Later, as Penelope prepared for bed in the guest room, she reflected on how much her life had changed in the month since arriving in Lordsburg. She had come seeking escape, a place to hide from her grief. Instead, she had found purpose in her teaching, community among the townspeople, and love with Grant. The locket he had given her still hung around her neck. Opening it, she looked at the small photograph of her family. I think you would approve, she whispered to their images. I think you would like him. For the first time, the thought of her family brought more comfort than pain. They would always be part of her, as Grant had said, but they would want her to be happy, to live fully and love deeply. Spring came early to Lordsburg that year. By mid-March, the snow had melted and the first green shoots were appearing. Grant's recovery was nearly complete. He still walked with a slight limp after long days, but had returned to most of his regular activities around the ranch. Wedding preparations occupied much of Penelope's free time. The ceremony was set for the first Saturday in May, when the apple orchard would be in full bloom. Mrs. Thornton and the ladies of the town had taken charge of many of the arrangements, determined that the most talked-about courtship in Lordsburg should have an equally memorable wedding. They're planning enough food to feed half the territory, Grant commented one evening as they walked through the orchard, checking the developing buds. Mrs. Benson is beside herself trying to coordinate with Mrs. Henderson on the menu. I tried to suggest something simpler, Penelope said with a laugh. But I was informed that as the first teacher to marry in Lordsburg's history, tradition demands a celebration. Tradition that they are inventing as they go, Grant smiled, taking her hand. But I don't mind. You deserve to be celebrated. The trees around them were just beginning to show pink buds, a promise of the blossoms to come. Penelope stopped beneath a particularly large tree, looking up at its branches. This one was my grandfather's favorite, Grant said, following her gaze. He planted it himself when he first claimed this land. Said he wanted something that would outlast him, that would feed generations of Kerrigans. It's beautiful, Penelope said softly. I thought we might be married beneath it, Grant suggested, if you'd like that. When the blossoms are out, it creates a sort of natural cathedral. The idea was perfect, a symbol of roots and continuity, of life continuing despite loss. I would like that very much. Grant turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Penelope, there's something I've been wanting to ask you, something important. What is it? She asked, noticing the serious expression that had come over his face. After the wedding, would you consider changing the name of the ranch? Grant asked. From the Double K to the KZ Ranch. Kerrigan and Zimmerman. Penelope stared at him, deeply moved by what he was suggesting. But it's been the Double K for generations. Your family tradition, you are my family now, Grant said simply. And your name, your heritage, deserves to be honored alongside mine. Our children should know that they come from both of us, from both our stories. Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. Our children, she repeated softly. Grant smiled. I hope there will be many. But even if God blesses us with just one or none at all, you will always be family enough for me. Penelope reached up to touch his face, her heart full to bursting. I love you, Grant Kerrigan. And yes, I would be honored to have my name joined with yours in every way. His kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as she responded, her arms going around his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathless. 6 more weeks until our wedding, Grant murmured. It feels like an eternity. We've waited this long, Penelope reminded him. "A little longer won't hurt us. Speak for yourself," Grant grumbled good-naturedly, making her laugh. As they walked back toward the house, hand in hand in the gathering dusk, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought her here. When she had warned Grant that she didn't trust easily, she had been protecting a heart too damaged to risk loving again. His patient response that he would wait as long as it took had been the first step in healing that damage. Now, as their wedding day approached, Penelope realized that Grant had kept his promise. He had waited, giving her the time she needed to trust again, to believe in love again. The waiting was nearly over, but the love they had found would last a lifetime. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, the apple orchard a sea of pink and white blossoms. Townspeople had been arriving at the Double K since early morning, setting up tables and chairs, arranging food and decorations. In the main house, Penelope prepared in the guest room that would soon no longer be hers. Mrs. Thornton and several other ladies helped her dress in the wedding gown. They had collaborated to create a simple but elegant dress of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "You look beautiful, dear Mrs. Thornton said, adjusting the small wreath of apple blossoms that crowned Penelope's upswept hair. "Grant won't be able to take his eyes off you." "Something borrowed," Mrs. Henderson said, fastening a pearl bracelet around Penelope's wrist. "My mother wore this at her wedding." "And something blue," added young Sally Jenkins, one of Penelope's students, presenting her with a blue ribbon to tie around her bouquet of wildflowers and apple blossoms. "Thank you all," Penelope said, emotion making her voice waver. "For everything." Now, no tears, Mrs. Thornton chided gently. "You'll ruin your complexion before the ceremony even begins." A knock at the door revealed Sheriff Dawson, looking uncomfortable in his best suit. "Ladies, they're ready whenever Miss Zimmerman is." When Penelope had mentioned having no male relatives to walk her down the aisle, the sheriff had quietly offered his services. "Be an honor," he'd said gruffly. "Always thought of you as the daughter I never had." Now he offered his arm with formal dignity. "Miss Zimmerman, you're a sight to behold." "Thank you, Sheriff," Penelope said, taking his arm, "for everything." The women went ahead to take their places, leaving Penelope and the sheriff to follow a few minutes later. As they walked through the house and out the back door toward the orchard, Penelope's heart beat a rapid rhythm against her ribs. "Nervous?" the sheriff asked quietly. "A little," she admitted. "But in a good way." He patted her hand. "Kerrigan's a good man, one of the best. You've chosen well." "I know," Penelope said with certainty. The orchard path had been decorated with ribbons and flowers, leading to the ancient apple tree where Grant waited. As they rounded the final bend and the gathering came into view, Penelope caught her first glimpse of her groom. Grant stood tall beneath the blossoming tree, his dark suit contrasting with the pale flowers overhead. The moment he saw her, his face transformed with a joy so pure it took her breath away. The townspeople, so many that they filled the orchard, rose to their feet as Penelope and the sheriff began their walk. Familiar faces smiled at her from every direction, her students, their parents, shopkeepers, ranchers, everyone who had become part of her life in Lordsburg. When they reached Grant, the sheriff placed her hand in his with formal solemnity. "Take care of her, Kerrigan," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "With my life," Grant promised. The minister's words washed over Penelope as she stood facing Grant, her hands in his. The traditional vows seemed to take on new meaning as they repeated them, promises of love and fidelity, in sickness and in health, until death parted them. She and Grant had already faced some of those challenges. They understood the weight of the words they spoke. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Grant's kiss was both tender and exultant. The cheers of the assembled guests seemed distant compared to the look in his eyes when he finally pulled away. "Mrs. Kerrigan," he whispered, just for her ears. "Mr. Kerrigan," she replied with a smile. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. Tables groaned with food, musicians played for dancing, and children ran laughing between the trees. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit throughout the orchard, creating a magical atmosphere of light and shadow among the blossoms. "Happy?" Grant asked as they shared a quiet moment away from the festivities. "More than I ever thought possible," Penelope answered honestly. "When you arrived in Lordsburg last fall, did you ever imagine this is where you'd end up?" he asked, gesturing to the celebration, to the ranch, to the two of them together. "Never," she admitted. "I was too afraid to imagine happiness again." Grant's arm tightened around her waist. "And now?" "Now I'm not afraid anymore," Penelope said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You taught me that love is worth the risk." "Always," Grant agreed softly. As the last guests departed and the night deepened around them, Penelope and Grant stood together on the porch of what was now their home, watching the lights of wagons disappearing down the road toward town. "Welcome home, Mrs. Kerrigan," Grant said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Penelope wrapped her arms around his neck, all the love she felt reflected in his eyes. "I am home," she said simply, "wherever you are." Years later, Penelope sat on the porch of the KZ Ranch, watching her husband teach their son to ride. 8-year-old Thomas sat proudly on his pony, listening intently to Grant's instructions. Nearby, 5-year-old Sarah played with the rag doll Penelope had made her, occasionally looking up to wave at her brother and father. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. The orchard had expanded, the cattle herd had grown, and the main house had been enlarged to accommodate their family. The silver locket still hung around Penelope's neck, though now it contained not only the photograph of her parents and sister, but a small portrait of Grant and their children as well, past and present, joined together. Penelope still taught at the Lordsburg school 3 days a week, sharing duties with a younger teacher who had come from back east 2 years ago. The arrangement worked well, allowing her to balance her love of teaching with her life on the ranch. "Mama, look," Thomas called, guiding his pony in a perfect circle. "I did it." "Wonderful, darling," Penelope called back, smiling at the pride on both her son's and husband's faces. Grant helped Thomas dismount, then sent the boy to take care of his pony as he'd been taught. Walking back to the porch, Grant sat down beside Penelope, taking her hand in his. "He's a natural," Grant said, nodding toward their son. "Just like his mother." "I believe it was his father who taught me to ride properly," Penelope reminded him with a smile. "So I did," Grant chuckled. "Though you were a quick study." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children, the familiar rhythm of the ranch continuing around them. The afternoon sun cast a golden light over everything, reminding Penelope of that first day she had arrived in Lordsburg, dusty and alone. "What are you thinking about?" Grant asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About trust," Penelope replied honestly. "About how frightened I was to trust anyone when I first came here, how certain I was that I would always be alone." Grant squeezed her hand. "And now?" Penelope looked at their children, at the home they had built together, at the man who had patiently waited for her to heal. "Now I know that trust isn't given all at once. It grows day by day, through the small moments as much as the grand ones." "Like a good marriage," Grant observed. "Exactly like a good marriage," Penelope agreed, leaning against his shoulder. That evening, as they prepared for bed in their room, Grant wrapped his arms around Penelope from behind, pressing a kiss to her neck. 11 years since you stepped off that stagecoach," he murmured. Best day of my life." Penelope turned in his embrace to face him. The years had added a touch of silver to Grant's temples, a few lines around his eyes, but to her, he was more handsome than ever. "You remember what I told you that night at the Harvest Festival?" she asked. "I don't trust easily, I warned you." "And I said I'd wait as long as it took," Grant recalled, his eyes soft with memory. "Was it worth the wait?" Penelope asked, though she knew the answer. Grant's smile was as warm and sure as the day they had married beneath the apple blossoms. "Every minute," he said, drawing her closer. "Every single minute." As his lips met hers in a kiss as sweet as their first, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that the broken heart she had brought to Lordsburg had not only healed but grown stronger through love's patient nurturing. The trust she had been so afraid to give had yielded a life richer and more beautiful than she could have imagined. And in the quiet sanctuary of their bedroom, with the sounds of their ranch settling around them and their children sleeping peacefully down the hall, Penelope and Grant renewed the promise they had made to each other beneath the apple tree, a promise of love that had begun with patience and grown into a lifetime of happiness.